Are you serious? You're paying in nickels and dimes. That's what the waitress said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. The clatter of coins on the counter echoed like shame. The veteran didn't look up, just kept counting quietly one coin at a time. But when she rolled her eyes and made one cruel comment too many, someone else stood up from the corner booth. And what they did next made the whole room fall silent. If you believe every act of service deserves dignity, comment respect to honor those who gave everything, even when they have little left. Walter, 81, walked with a slight limp and a quiet pride. Every Saturday morning, he visited Miller's Diner for the same 5.99's breakfast, special eggs toast, and a refillable cup of coffee. He always paid an exact change, not out of stubbornness, but necessity. Every dime was counted, every dollar mattered. That morning, he laid his coins carefully on the counter, mostly nickels and dimes saved from a coffee tin marked diner. The young waitress sighed, rolling her eyes. Are you serious? You're paying in nickels and dimes. Her voice cut through the room. Heads turned. One man chuckled under his breath. Walter didn't say a word. He just nodded and kept counting, lips pressed, tight hands shaking slightly. People like you hold up the line, she muttered. We're not a coin exchange. A few customers snickered. The manager peeked out from the back but said nothing. Walter finished his count, placed a crumpled receipt beside the coins, and stepped back. You done? She said flatly. Next. Walter nodded and turned away, his weathered face betraying nothing. His fingers, once steady enough to disarm explosives in the rain, now trembled slightly as he adjusted his worn cardigan. He'd expected many things in his old age. The arthritis, the loneliness, the dreams that still woke him at 3 a.m., but never the humiliation of being made to feel small for having so little. The walk back to his usual booth felt eternal. Each step past watching eyes made the distance stretch like a desert march. Walter focused on the table ahead, the same way he'd once focused on distant landmarks during long patrols. One point to reach, then the next, then safety. His coffee had grown cold during the transaction. The eggs congealed on his plate, no longer appealing, but Walter would eat every bite. Waste was unforgivable to a man who had once gone 3 days on a single protein bar while pinned down by enemy fire around him. The diner's weekend buzz continued. Families chatted. Silverware clinked against plates. Coffee mugs were refilled at every table, but his Walter removed a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully wiped a small coffee spill beside his plate. Order and cleanliness were habits the military had instilled in him 60 years ago. Habits that remained when so much else had faded. From his wallet, he removed a small plastic pill organizer heart medication morning dose. He placed it discreetly in his palm, not wanting to draw more attention. A lifetime of service reduced to this quiet ritual in a corner booth, while the world moved on without noticing. Walter sat back at his booth, sipping his coffee slowly. The eggs were cold now. No one came to warm his cup. At the booth beside him, a teenage boy whispered to his dad, "Why's everyone staring at that old guy?" The father replied, "Some people just think they're owed respect." Walter didn't react, but his hand gripped the coffee mug a little tighter. Years ago, those same hands had repaired helicopter rotors under enemy fire. He'd earned his stripes in places most people couldn't pronounce. In his wallet was a faded photo. 3 men from his unit, arms around each other in the jungle, all long gone now. At the counter, the waitress laughed with another server. "We should start charging a coin sorting fee." Walter stood slowly, his back aching. He reached for his cane and his hat, a worn olive green cap with a single word, "I, veteran." He didn't want attention, just dignity. As he turned to leave, another voice rose up from a corner booth, calm but commanding. "How much is his meal?" The room quieted. The waitress turned. "Excuse me," a man in his late 50s stood, suit jacket open just enough to reveal a row of service pins. "I asked how much the gentleman's meal cost." $6, she mumbled. He walked forward, laid a $100 bill on the counter. "That covers his breakfast and everyone else's tip today." The manager stepped out finally alert. "Sir, you don't need to." "You're right, I don't, but I will." He turned to Walter. "Sergeant Walters." Walter blinked. "Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, retired now, but still your subordinate, sir." The midday sun through the diner's windows cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Walter's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his cane, the polished wood smooth from years of use. The weight of eyes on his back made him straighten his posture. Military training kicking in even after all these decades. The coins thing is getting ridiculous. The waitress continued at the counter, unaware that her voice carried. "Last week it was all pennies like get a bank account already." Her coworker laughed. "Maybe he's saving his dollars for something important, and he was—" The dollars went to his granddaughter's college fund, 5 each month. Not much, but it was what he could manage on a fixed income that barely covered his medications, in the small apartment where he'd lived since his wife passed. A young couple at a nearby table avoided eye contact as Walter passed, suddenly very interested in their menus. An older woman shook her head slightly, perhaps in sympathy, perhaps in judgment. Walter couldn't tell anymore. Outside the diner window, life continued. Cars passed, people, walked dogs. None of them knew or cared about the small drama unfolding inside, about the man who had once jumped on a grenade, thankfully a dud to save his unit, now being mocked for counting coins. Walter's thoughts drifted to his morning routine, waking at 5 a.m. Some habits never changed. Making his bed with military precision, counting out his coins for breakfast from the coffee tin. The ritual of saving and counting gave structure to his days. He reached the door, pushing it open with his cane, when the voice stopped him, clear, authoritative, unmistakable to anyone who had served Lieutenant Colonel Reeves. Walter hadn't seen him in almost 40 years. Not since the hospital in Germany, where Walter had visited every day for 2 weeks reading letters from home to the then young lieutenant who couldn't see through bandaged eyes. The diner felt so quiet that the sound of ice dropping in the soda machine echoed like a gunshot. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Even the cook peered through the service window, spatula in hand. Walter turned slowly, pride and pain wrestling in his chest. Recognition flickered across his face as the years melted away, revealing the young officer he had once known beneath a now silver hair and weathered face. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, he repeated the name, feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. Reeves stepped forward and offered a sharp salute. "I never forgot what you did for me in Dong." Walter looked stunned. "That was a lifetime ago. I owe you that lifetime," Reeves said. "And I'm not the only one." He turned to the waitress. "Do you know what it takes to make a man survive 3 tours of combat and still walk into a diner with dignity?" She shook her head, face pale. "Respect," he said. "And you stripped him of it in front of a room full of people." The other customers stared. Some lowered their eyes. Reeves turned to the manager. "This man should never pay for a meal here again." The manager nodded quickly. "Absolutely. From now on, Sergeant Walters eats for free." Reeves looked to Walter. "You taught me that no soldier ever eats alone. Let's remind this place why." Reeves pulled out his phone. Within 30 minutes, 4 more men arrived, fellow veterans from the same unit. They all wore old caps. Some had canes. One was in a wheelchair. They surrounded Walter's booth. One said, "You carried me out of a blast zone. Time I carry this tab." A young family watched from a nearby table. The daughter whispered, "Are they heroes?" Her mother replied, "The real kind." Photos were taken. News spread fast. Local outlets ran the headline, "Veteran humiliated with coins." Then his brothers showed up. That night, a dozen veterans arrived for dinner. Each one left a flag pin beside the cash register. The waitress apologized tearfully. "I didn't know." Walter replied, "You didn't ask." She offered her paycheck to cover his meals for the month. He refused. Kindness doesn't have a price tag. Reeves and Walter sat at the booth long after the diner closed, talking like no time had passed. Before leaving, Reeves left his card with the owner. If you ever forget again, I'll be back with the whole unit. The diner's atmosphere transformed as the veterans gathered around Walter's booth. The initial awkwardness gave way to something deeper, a reunion of men bound by experiences few civilians could comprehend. Their laughter carried undertones of shared pain. Their handshakes lingered with unspoken understanding. "Remember that night outside Pleiku?" asked a man with a prosthetic leg, his eyes twinkling. "When Walter here convinced the supply sergeant that requisition forms could be signed in triplicate by moonlight. Got us those extra rations, didn't it?" Walter smiled, color returning to his face, and thermal blankets added another veteran. His white beard, neatly trimmed, saved us during that cold snap. Reeves watched Walter transform before his eyes. The hunched shoulders straightened, the trembling hands steadied. The quiet dignity that had always been Walter's hallmark now radiated outward, touching everyone in the room. The waitress stood awkwardly by the coffee pot, uncertain whether to approach. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by genuine remorse, as the gravity of her actions sank in. "Ma'am," called Reeves gently, "we could use some coffee. Be over here if you don't mind." She approached cautiously, coffee pot trembling slightly in her grip. "I'm so sorry, sir, I didn't realize it's Sergeant," corrected Walter softly. "And there's no need to apologize anymore. Just remember for next time, not just for him," added the veteran in the wheelchair. "For all of us, we're still here, even when you don't notice us." The manager, sensing a teaching moment, gathered his entire staff near the kitchen. Their hushed conversation ended with nods of understanding and a new policy being written in the employee handbook. Outside the diner, word continued to spread. A local news van pulled up, the reporter asking for an interview. Walter declined politely. "This isn't about me," he insisted. "It's about remembering we're all just one bad day away from counting coins." By late afternoon, the diner's phone rang continuously. Veterans from 3 counties called to express support. A local VFW post announced plans for their monthly meeting to be held at Miller's Diner. Throughout it all, Walter remained calm, accepting the sudden attention with the same quiet grace with which he'd endured the earlier humiliation. When a customer tried to press a $50 bill into his hand, Walter redirected him to the donation jar for the local veterans' home that had mysteriously appeared on the counter. As evening approached, Reeves and Walter moved to a quieter corner booth. The initial crowd had dispersed, leaving them alone with coffee and memories. "You know," Reeves said softly, "I looked at for you for years. They said you'd gone off the grid." Walter nodded. "Needed some quiet. Figured I'd done my part." "You did more than your part," Reeves replied, "which is why I never stopped looking." A week later, the diner installed a small plaque near the register in honor of those who paid in more than money. Walter returned the next Saturday. This time, the waitress greeted him with fresh coffee, a warm smile, and a quiet, "Thank you." The corner booth now had a small reserve sign on it, Sergeant Walter's seat. Veterans from nearby towns began visiting on weekends. The manager started a pay-it-forward board for anyone in uniform. Kids came in to shake Walter's hand. One boy asked, "Did you really pay with coins?" Walter smiled. "I paid with what I had. That's what soldiers do." One morning, a stranger sat across from him. "My father served with you. He said you gave him hope when the rest of the world turned its back." Walter nodded, eyes misty. "We all needed someone. I'm glad I could be that for him." The diner's slogan quietly changed. Beneath the sign out front, it now read, "Hot meals, open hearts, no one forgotten." The transformation of Miller's Diner continued in subtle ways over the following months. The staff learned to recognize the quiet signs of veterans in need, the caps, the pins, sometimes just a certain way of carrying themselves. Coffee refills came without asking. Conversations flowed more easily. Walter's routine expanded. His Saturday breakfast remained sacred, but he now added a Wednesday afternoon visit where he would sit for hours, available to any veteran who needed an understanding ear. Some came to share memories. Others, particularly younger veterans from more recent conflicts, came seeking guidance on navigating civilian life with military wounds, both visible and hidden. The coffee tin at Walter's apartment still collected coins, but they no longer went toward his diner fund. Instead, they became the starting point for what would eventually become the Small Change, Big Respect Initiative, a community program that helped veterans with minor but essential expenses: bus fare to medical appointments, phone cards to call family warm socks for winter. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves became a regular presence as well, using his connections to bring resources to veterans who came seeking Walter's counsel. The corner booth became an unofficial office where paperwork was sorted. Calls were made and bureaucratic knots were untangled. The waitress who had once mocked Walter became one of his most dedicated allies. She enrolled in nursing school, specializing in veterans care, and worked her shifts around her class schedule. When a local reporter asked about the changes in the diner, Walter simply said, "It's not about the coins. It's about seeing people for who they are, not what they have."